the AFC North and scouting the Steelers' enemies. We're going to take a look at the depth charts of the Baltimore Ravens, Cincinnati Bengals, and Cleveland Browns. If you haven't already, hit the like button, subscribe, share. Let's get into it. Let's take a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers' enemies in the AFC North, the Ravens, Bengals, and Browns. Okay, we have up the Ravens depth chart. Let's take a look at it from top to bottom and see how the Steelers size up against a team like the Ravens. So first of all, the first thing I see here are the receiving core: Zay Flowers, Rashard Bateman, Nelson Aguilar. This is not a strong receiving core for any team. And the Ravens, certainly, it's not a strong receiving core from them. You know, these guys can catch. Nelson Aguilar's been in the league a little while. He can make some plays, but none of these are number one receivers. You could argue maybe some of these guys are number two receivers, but it's really 2 and 3 and so on. So the Ravens have a number one receiver problem, really just a weak wide receiver core in general. As we look at the Ravens offensive line here, Ronnie Stanley's always been pretty good. Tyler Linderbaum has been pretty good for them since they drafted him. Andrew Voorhees has been decent. I think they've got a pretty decent offensive line. Nothing crazy special. Some of these guys have been in the league a little while, but I think overall, it's a line good enough and certainly that John Harbaugh can use to bully teams around. So I think they're going to be okay from that standpoint. Now we look at the tight end position and Mark Andrews. Look, he's a good player. He's going to continue to be a good player. He's going to continue to be an outlet valve for Lamar Jackson. He can block. He can do all the things. So they're pretty set there. Isaiah Likely's fairly decent depth. He's played and he can play, but from a tight end position, I think they're pretty well set. The quarterback, Lamar Jackson, he's one of the best players in the league. Certainly one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's been an MVP, I think, multiple times. He can run, he can throw, and boy, he's got a pretty looking pass, and he can throw the ball deep. He can run on you at any time. He's an electric player. Certainly, he's had his problems in the playoffs, but ultimately, if you have Lamar Jackson on your team, you have a chance. Behind Lamar Jackson, you have Josh Johnston. He's been in this league for a long, long time. He's not a great backup quarterback, but teams seem to like him. They seem to feel comfortable with him in the backup position. But he's not going to be able to hold this offense up on his own. Lamar Jackson has got to stay healthy for this to be a good offensive team, especially with the lack of receiving talent. So now we have the running back position with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry has been a tremendous running back since he's come into the league. But you can see in his stats, he peaked a few years ago. He's been sort of falling off since then. That's not uncommon for a running back that's in their, gets into their late 20s. I believe he's 30 or almost 31 now. And last year wasn't his best year. His yards per carry were down. His success rate was down. He may get a little bit of rejuvenation here being in a Ravens offense that has a good offensive line, but ultimately he has a lot of miles on him. It's a tough position to play. So I don't know that he's the Derrick Henry of old, but he's certainly a threat to be that Derrick Henry because he is so big and punishing and he has that second gear that when he gets in the open, he's gone. So he could be a great complement to Lamar Jackson. It just depends on, how well he can hold up. They've had the same fullback for a long time. They employ the fullback, actually more than the Steelers do. But Patrick Ricard is fairly good fullback. So overall, from an offensive standpoint, they shouldn't have too much trouble running the ball. They've got Justice Hill there. He's been there for a while. He can run. He can play. And they've got a decent offensive line. They just don't have a lot of receiving talent. So this is pretty much the same Ravens team we've seen year in and year out. They're going to play bully ball. They're going to run the ball. They're going to keep you guessing with Lamar Jackson. So it's going to be a formidable offense, but maybe not so much in the air. So let's get down to defense now. As we start looking at the top here, we've got Broderick Washington, Michael Pierce. I don't even know this next guy here, Justin. I don't even know how to pronounce his name. And I usually know most players, but as far as Broderick Washington, Michael Pierce, they're decent players. They've been around for a little while. They're known commodities. So I think, again, the defensive line will probably be decent. It doesn't look like from these players it's going to be extravagant or, one of the best in the league, but I think they'll be good. And as we look at their linebacking core here, they've got Kyle Van Noy. He's been around a long time, but he's very good. It just depends on whether age will catch up with him. Roquan Smith has been great. He's great in the inside. And then you've got this Trenton Simpson, who the Ravens think he's a mini Patrick Queen. That's yet to be seen, but he potentially might be. So from a linebacking perspective, they should be fairly good. Again, not top 5 in the league, but certainly, top half of the league, maybe top 10. So, again, starting to look like a solid defense, but, get nothing too special with the defensive line and linebacking core. Where things get special for the Ravens is their secondary. Marlon Humphrey is everywhere, always punching the ball out. They brought in Eddie Jackson, who, while he might not have played as well as the start of his career, this guy is still good and dangerous. You've got Kyle Hamilton, Brandon Stevens, Marcus Williams. This is just going to be a really good secondary. They're going to be extremely hard to throw on. That's the calling card of this defense. Not a lot of holes in it, but the secondary is really going to be their key piece. And then as we get into the special teams, really, I just want to highlight kickers. And they've got Justin Tucker, and he's the best in the league until somebody takes that title from him. He can make the longest kicks. He's accurate at kicking, and their special team game is pretty good. So I think overall, as we look at the Ravens, this team doesn't look too much different than it has looked the last few years. It's a playoff caliber team. It's going to vie for the AFC North title. The one thing I do note is that their secondary looks very formidable this year. So going to be tough to throw on. They look like they can be run on. It's just, we'll have to see what that looks like. So that is the Baltimore Ravens. And now let's go ahead and take a look at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals. So starting from the top, we've got Jamar Chase, who, is still one of the best receivers in the league. He hasn't played quite as well as his rookie season, but there's been some injuries to Joe Burrow. He's still a number one receiver, a guy you want to have on your team. They've got T. Higgins, who's a great number 2. Good for them. They still have him. And they've got this Trenton Irwin, who I think they've had for a little while. He seems to be replacing their previous number 3 wide receiver. His name is just escaping me right now. He's from Pittsburgh. But anyway, I mean, they've got a pretty good wide receiving core here. They've got some depth. They've got clear number 1, 2, 3. What more can you ask for? So good wide receiving core for the Cincinnati Bengals. As we look at their offensive line here, Orlando Brown, he's been around for a while, but he's good. Ted Karras or Karras, I believe he made it to a Pro Bowl last year, or maybe it was the year prior. So he's not too bad. But some of these other names in here, I mean, these are all pretty old guys. Alex Kappa, Trent Brown. I don't think that this is a very good offensive line. I think it's going to be in the bottom half of the league. And I think that's not going to serve the Cincinnati Bengals offense well. It's in character for the Bengals. They have to pay Joe Burrow, so there's not a lot of money to go around, but this does not look like a youthful up-and-coming offensive line. I think that this offensive line is going to struggle. So, and especially as we get in the tight end position, Mike Gesicki, Drew Sample, there's nothing special here. These are not world beaters. These guys aren't particularly good at any one thing, catching or passing or blocking. So that doesn't help the offensive line and the running game And then you get into their running backs, and they've got Zach Moss, Chase Brown. They're not great running backs either. So they have Joe Burrow, who again is one of the best quarterbacks in the league when he plays. He's always played well. He's very dangerous, but this looks like a team that is the only way they're really going to be able to move the football is throwing it with their star quarterback and star wide receivers. I don't see them being able to run the ball well on anybody. And I think Joe Burrow is going to be running for his life a lot of the time. So that's going to be what they're going to have to deal with. But he is Joe Burrow. He's got Jamar Chase. If those two can hook up, they can drive the offense. Maybe the running back and offensive line can be a complement. But I think that this offense has the potential to struggle in 2024. Looking at the defense here, we've got Sam Hubbard, who's pretty good. Sheldon Rankins, who's fairly decent. BJ Hill. I think that this defensive line seems to be pretty good. Nothing really to note terribly good or bad. It'll be okay. It'll be solid. Trey Hendrickson is pretty good, although I think he's a linebacker. He's listed as a defensive end, but he's pretty good. So I think they'll be in fairly good shape. I think Trey Hendrickson's been to a Pro Bowl. So as we get into the linebacking core, Cam Taylor-Britt, Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, there's some youth here, but there's nothing that special. I wouldn't be too overly concerned about their linebacking core. And like I said, their defensive line is fairly decent. So, a solid defense so far, but nothing, maybe average, nothing overly special. As we get into the secondaries where they get a little bit better with Von Bell, DJ Turner, Mike Hilton, we know is a good nickel cornerback. Geno Stone, I don't know much about him, but ultimately the secondary looks pretty good. They're going to be fairly tough to throw on. Not unbeatable by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly they've got players who can play back there, and that's maybe one of the best parts of their defense is going to be their secondary. And as we look at Evan McPherson is a special teams, this is a guy, he's got a really long leg. He can make, mid 50s, high 50-yard field goals. He's fairly accurate from what I've seen. So I think they're going to be, in a good place with Evan McPherson. And overall, I'm not that impressed with the Cincinnati Bengals. They're definitely a beatable team. They've got some great players on offense, but I think with this offensive line and running game and tight end position, all teams are going to be locking in on their pass game and daring them to run on them or try to play bully ball. And that could be difficult for the Bengals. Their defense will hold teams in check. You're not going to score a ton of points on this defense, but again, they're nothing that special. Teams are going to get their touchdowns. They're going to get some points on them. So again, they're not as good of a team as the Ravens. We've already done the Steelers depth chart. They're not as good of a team as the Steelers. So this could be a tough year for the Bengals. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it looks like. So off to the Browns now. Okay, the Cleveland Browns. So again, we'll start from the top. We've got Amari Cooper. He's a great number one wide receiver. He's a little bit older, but boy, he's still playing really well. Next, you have Elijah Moore and Jerry Jeudy. These guys are kind of the same wide receiver. They were picked high by their teams, and those teams in the Jets and Broncos thought that they were going to be, maybe develop into number ones or solid number twos, and it just never manifested, and they got traded. So you've kind of got a number one and two number threes on the Cleveland Browns. So not a terribly great or bad receiving core. It's likely somewhere in the middle. It's definitely great to have Amari Cooper. Maybe Jerry Jeudy can come out of his shell. Maybe Elijah Moore can come out of his, but given what they've done in the past, they're likely are what they are, which are number three wide receivers. So we'll see. As we get into the offensive line, Joel Bitonio, Jarek Wills, Wyatt Teller, Jack Conklin, a lot of these guys have been there, done that. They've been to Pro Bowls. They've been around the league a long time. So I think that this is actually a fairly decent offensive line. It's a little bit older. It's certainly not a youthful offensive line, but it's much better than, the old and probably not that good offensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals. So I think they're going to be able to push people around and open up some lanes for the running game. Especially you've got players like David Njoku, who, is a great tight end, can block well. He can catch well. He can do everything. So between him and the offensive line, they're going to be able to push people around. It really just depends on this offensive line's health. I don't think Jack Conklin has played much over the last couple years. Same thing with maybe Jarrett Will. So it depends on the health of this team and what they do. So now we're on to the quarterback position and Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson, he had that one great year for the Houston Texans, but they think they went something like 4-12 or 5-11. It wasn't good. Probably a lot of garbage time points. The guy is talented. He's got all the tools, and he's shown that he has all the tools. But I think after that incident or several incidents with the massage therapist and the sexual harassment, it's kind of gotten his head, and he's never come back and looked like the Deshaun Watson of old. The Browns fans and everybody can continue to hold out hope that he's going to get that magic back, but it may not be back. And he may just be an average to below average quarterback that got paid, almost $250 million in guaranteed money. So we'll see. We'll see if he can get that magic back. He's backed up by Jameis Winston, who is a known commodity. He can start, he can play, he can make all the throws, but he throws a lot of picks. So, when it comes to the offensive production for Jameis Winston, you're going to get those picks, you're going to get those mistakes. And they have behind him Tyler Huntley, and we've seen him play, and he can play. He can do, an impression of Lamar Jackson. We've seen that. So it'd be interesting to see how they employ, these three guys, because you've pretty much got, two fairly decent backups behind Deshaun Watson. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. And then from a running game perspective, Nick Chubb has been one of the best in the league, but he took a big shot to the knee last year. He seems to be lifting and playing fairly decently. I don't know if he's going to get that magic back. Hopefully he will, for his sake and his family's sake. But it's tough as you're a running back. You get older, it becomes tougher. Jerome Ford has played, quite a bit. We know he can play. We know Dante Foreman can play. So I think from a running back perspective, they're pretty solid. They've got a good offensive line. I expect the Browns to run the ball, to move people around, and, to try to make plays to Amari Cooper when they can. And we'll see what Deshaun Watson can do. I think this offense is going to run based on, really, it can go as far as Deshaun Watson will take them. So that's the Browns offense. Getting down to their defense, from a defensive, line perspective, Shelby Harris is good. Desarius Smith is good. Dalvin Tomlinson, I'm pretty sure he's good. I've seen Quentin Jefferson play. He's okay. So this should be a pretty decent defensive line. It should be pretty tough to run on. It should be putting pressure on the quarterback. Then you get into the linebacking core. We'll stay on the defensive line with Myles Garrett. You've got, one of the best in the league is a defensive player in Myles Garrett. You guys know how I feel that TJ Watt is better, and the numbers prove it. And again, I'll prove it to you. But Myles Garrett is, a second best defensive player in the league. Then you've got, linebackers in Jeremiah Uwasu, who's been great for them. They were able to get him in the second round when he should have been taken the first round. Jordan Hicks has been, fairly decent. Devin Bush, the Steelers drafted him. They moved up to get him. We all know he's undersized. He's not tall enough. He's not good enough, but he can come in and be serviceable. So I think from a linebacking core perspective, it's nothing too special. They're going to be able to make plays on them. I think they're going to be better maybe in pass coverage than they are in helping stop the run, but it's okay. But nothing special or too bad. And then we get into the secondary, and the Browns have a pretty decent secondary. Denzel Ward is great. Greg Newsom's been pretty good. They've got Grant Delpit. So I think they're not going to be easy to throw on at all. And that really is three secondaries between the Browns, the Bengals, and the best one with the Ravens. They're all going to be tough to throw on. So it's not going to be a walk in the park there. And then you got Dustin Hopkins. He's been in the league a long time. He is what he is. He's good enough to, probably middle of the pack as far as kickers go, but he's definitely reliable. And then he's backed up by Cade York, who was drafted, who really, didn't play that well. They're going to be battling for that position. And one of those guys is likely going to try to find a job elsewhere. So, that's the Cleveland Browns. They should be a pretty good team. But it really, everything depends on Deshaun Watson and how he can play. If he plays like he's been playing, this team isn't going to be anything that special. And they've got some weaknesses in the middle of the defense and things like that. But for the most part, again, they could vie for a playoff spot. So that is scouting the AFC North. And here are my takeaways. The Steelers are going to have a tough go. I do think the Steelers are a good team. I think they're a team that can get to the playoffs and actually compete, maybe even win a game. But in order to do that, they've got to either win the division or get one of the 3 wild card spots. And all of the teams in the AFC North look pretty good. I think the worst team on paper, as we saw, is the Cincinnati Bengals. They're going to really struggle everything offensively that is not named Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. And from a defensive perspective, they're going to be fairly solid, but there's nothing that special about their defense. So you're going to be able to score points on them. If you can shut down Jamar Chase, they're not going to be able to score very well. So not too worried about the Cincinnati Bengals. The Browns are kind of a big question mark. How well will Deshaun Watson play? How well will Nick Chubb play coming back from this surgery? They've got great offensive linemen, a good tight end. But if the key people to handle the ball don't play well, it's going to be tough for them. Certainly they've got stars on defense. They're not going to be easy to throw on. You're not going to score a ton of points on this Browns defense. Last year, they were the number 1 defense in the league at home. They were actually one of the, I think, bottom 5 away. So we'll see what defense shows up, but certainly it's not going to be a walk in the park against the Browns. So again, just depends on their offense. And the Baltimore Ravens, they've got, of the 3, the best depth chart, the best roster. They've got all the tools on offense. They don't have a good receiving core, but that hasn't mattered for them over the past few years. So it's not something that they worry about. They just worry about running the football, bullying people, playing great defense, and letting Lamar Jackson do his magic and find players deep on certain plays and run and sort of get up so high on teams early in a game that they can just sit back and play defense and bully ball, and they don't have to score a ton of yards or points after that. So and on the other side for the Ravens, their secondary is going to be extremely hard to throw on. Anybody's going to try to throw on them, is going to be at risk of getting picked off. So for the Steelers to play them, they're really going to have to come up with good schemes, be able to run the ball well, get them into packages that are favorable for passing, not forcing ourselves to pass in obvious passing situations. So the Ravens are the team to beat. And that's just that. So that's what I think about the AFC North and our competition. What do you guys think? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? If you want a refresher on my analysis of the Steelers depth chart, go back and look at that video. You can compare it to this one. And we can have a spirited discussion and debate about it. So once again, I'm Ron John. This is Steelers Therapy. Until next time.